Welcome back. Today we're looking at the Iliad, book 17. In our last book we had Patroclus finally go out into the fight incredibly heroically, and then die. And we know that moment is going to lead to the action of the rest of the book. But because we already know where we're going, much like in book 15, this one is just going to stretch the tension out. So before we get into the action, let's look at the characters of book 17. One of the characters that gets to shine in this particular book is Menelaus. And Menelaus is of course incredibly important to the book as a whole. It's his wife that was stolen that led to this war. But he hasn't had a lot of opportunity to really show off his skills, and in this particular point, although Menelaus is not the best of the Greek heroes, he gets a chance to hold his own in this fight. We also see great Ajax again, who is the go-to warrior for the Greeks when they need somebody to protect them or to stand up and hold the line. And Menelaus and Ajax are going to have a big team up in this particular scene. On the Trojan side, we're going to see Hector again, who's just made this glorious kill of Patroclus, although not particularly glorious for him, since Patroclus had been very softened up by previous injuries. And Hector will continue to show himself, as he does in the second half of this book, as not as heroic as he at first looked. He continues to look a bit like a braggart and somewhat cowardly. On the other hand, we have Glaucus, who we saw in book 16 as standing up as strongly as he could for his friend Sarpedon. And Glaucus is going to remember those events of book 16 and how Hector backed out of that fight. Another one of the strong Trojan heroes that's going to be standing up in this particular sequence is Aeneas. And we've seen him several times throughout the book. His personality doesn't really get developed a whole lot here, but he does get some good fighting in. Okay, let's look at the action of book 17. As the book opens, Menelaus has seen Patroclus go down, and he decides to rush to the defense of his body. Rather than have Patroclus's body be dragged off by the Trojans and desecrated, he wants to defend it and bring it back to Achilles, so that Achilles can have a proper funeral for his dear friend. And this is going to spur the action of the entire book. In fact, the entire book is just one long fight scene over Patroclus's body, where the Greeks are trying desperately to get the body back to Achilles, and the Trojans want to drag off his body and desecrate it. Hector intends to chop it up and use it for dog food, and maybe put Patroclus's head on the wall. Anything to destroy the fighting spirit of the Greeks. And so Menelaus first runs up and challenges Euphorbus, the man who stabbed Patroclus in the back. And the two of them trade spears, and Menelaus kills Euphorbus. As he's taking Euphorbus's armor, however, Apollo goes and fires up Hector and sends him against Menelaus. And as he sees Hector charging him, Menelaus has a moment of internal struggle, because he knows he's not tough enough to take on Hector. We've seen that earlier in the book. But yet he doesn't want to desert Patroclus. And he has this internal struggle. It says, "He probed his own great heart. What can I do? If I leave this splendid gear and desert Patroclus, who fell here fighting, all to redeem my honor, won't any comrade curse me, seeing me break away? But if I should take on Hector and Hector's Trojans alone in single combat, trying to save my pride, won't they encircle me, one against so many? This flashing Hector has all Troy at his back. But why debate, my friend? Why thrash things out? When you fight a man against the will of the gods, a man they have sworn to honor, then look out. A heavy wave of ruins about to overwhelm you. Surely no Achaean will curse me, seeing me now giving ground to Hector, since fighting Hector is flanked by a god almighty. Ah, if only I knew where Ajax could be found, that man with his ringing war cry. We two together would go back to the melee, calling up our fury. Even fight in the teeth of every god on high, and haul the body back to Achilles. Somehow. Things are bad, but that would be the best." So Menelaus comes up with this plan. He knows he can't fight Hector alone. He has his pride, but he also knows it's suicide to fight against a man backed by the gods. And yet, he knows a man in his own army who has stood against waves of Trojans backed by the gods. It's Ajax. If anybody can hold this line, it's Ajax. So Menelaus says, if I team up with Ajax, maybe the two of us can do this. And so he fights his way backwards knowing he can't stand his ground over Patroclus' body. But as he backs up, he's constantly looking back and forth for Ajax. He finally sees him and calls to him, and Ajax comes to his side, and the two of them together charge again and stand over Patroclus' body. By this time, Hector's already taken Patroclus' armor. Of course, most of it was knocked off earlier by Apollo. Remember that Patroclus' armor is actually Achilles' armor that Patroclus wore to intimidate the Trojans. And so Hector has just hauled it off. He's ready to hack off Patroclus' head and turn him into dog food when he sees Ajax and Menelaus coming for him. And even though he's got the backing of Apollo, Hector chickens out and backs off from the fight. And so Ajax stands over Patroclus' body using his giant 7-layered shield to protect the body. And Glaucus, seeing Hector running away from the fight, gets angry. After all, Hector was the one that ran away from Sarpedon's body after Glaucus was determined to protect it at all costs. In the end, they had to give up Sarpedon's body. Now the gods took care of that and took Sarpedon off to his own home. But it was no thanks to Hector. And Glaucus turns to Hector and chides him for being a chicken and constantly running away. You abandoned Sarpedon, now you're abandoning the body of Patroclus. Come on, man up, Hector! If we could haul him from battle, dead as he is, and lodge him behind King Priam's looming walls, our enemies would release Sarpedon's gear at once. And then we could bring his body back to Troy. For the man we cut down here is the loyal friend of Prince Achilles, far the greatest among the Argive ships, and at his command go rugged fighters hand to hand. But you, with enemy war cries ringing in your ears, you lack the nerve to go up against great Ajax, that fierce heart, to look him straight in the eye and fight the man head on. He's a better man than you. So Patroclus is a key to trading for Sarpedon's body and his armor, at least in Glaucus' mind. Hector doesn't like being called a chicken, and he blames Zeus for making him run away, and then he decides that what he's going to do to show off is put on Achilles' armor and go back into the fight, wearing the armor stripped from Patroclus. He runs off and starts putting it on, and Zeus looks down at him and feels a little bit of pity for Hector. After all, Hector is veering towards his death. He's never going to see his family again. Again, spoilers. And so Zeus gives him an extra dose of courage and god power to help him in this fight. It's like a consolation prize. And so Hector, all charged up again, says, whoever gets Patroclus' body is going to get this huge reward. You'll get half the spoil. Bring him back to us. And the Trojans are fired up and they all charge Ajax and Menelaus. And so now, as they're watching the entire Trojan army close in on them, Ajax is standing here strong and Menelaus beside him, but they know they're in kind of trouble. And so Ajax turns to Menelaus and is like, hey, you might want to get us some backup, just in case. Things look a little bit tough here. And so Menelaus shouts out the call, and up comes little Ajax, and Idomeneus, Meriones, and all of the other heroes come rushing to back them up. And the two sides crash into each other right over the body of Patroclus, and the fighting is very intense, and there's killing back and forth. And this lasts intensely for a few minutes until the Trojans begin to be afraid and back up again. Just as they do, though, Apollo stands before Aeneas and tries to give him some extra courage. And of course he's in disguise, but Aeneas recognizes him, and seeing that he's got a god on his side, he shouts for the men to keep struggling and keep fighting back. And so the Trojans press back into the fight extra strong, and Ajax pulls his men tighter in a tight circle around the body of Patroclus to try to stave off these Trojans. Then we have a quick cut across the field and we see everything else that's going on. There's Antilochus and his brother who are still fighting on the field. They don't know that Patroclus is down yet. We see the tight fighting scrum over the body of Patroclus, and then we see back in the camp Achilles, who is still unaware that his best friend is dead, and he's looking out over the field waiting for news. And as the fighting continues intensely over the body, we have the chariot of Achilles there in Patroclus, and the horses who begin to weep over the body of Patroclus. These are really special horses. They're immortal horses. And here they are grieving over the loss of Patroclus. And Zeus feels pity for the horses, but the rider Automedon wishes he could get in on the fighting. And so he calls for some assistance from another man called Alcimedon, and the two of them together go ahead and try to charge the fighting. Hector and Aeneas for a moment get distracted by the super cool chariot and think, man, we should steal that. But as they charge the chariot, Automedon takes down one of their friends, causing them to back up and return to the body of Patroclus. Achilles' chariot is too special to be stolen. Menelaus and Ajax are continuing the struggle over the body when all of a sudden what appears to be Phoenix, but is really Athena, appears to Menelaus, giving him some courage. And in that moment he says, if only Athena would come give me some help. And Athena's like, aw, thanks. And so she gives him an extra boost of god power. Of course, at the same time, Apollo is giving boosts to Hector and his men, and so it really kind of evens out. In fact, Zeus is definitely on the side of the Trojans at the moment, and so he begins to darken the skies and thunder and shake the Greeks with fear. So much so that many of the Greeks who are becoming injured and frightened have to back off. Idomeneus' driver is down, and so he has to take him off to safety. And Ajax and Menelaus are looking around, and they realize that the fight is totally against them. Zeus is definitely on the other side. They're not backing down, but it's very discouraging. And Ajax prays to Zeus, and he's like, why? Come on! Can't you just let up for a bit? And Zeus is like, okay. And so he lightens the atmospheric effects a little. And Ajax, knowing that there really is, they're in a complete deadlock here. The gods are against them, they're holding the line, but they're not getting anywhere. He calls to Menelaus and he says, hey Menelaus, run get Antilochus and send him to let Achilles know how things are going. Because Achilles doesn't know Patroclus is down yet. Maybe if we could get Achilles out here, maybe this would finally rally him and stir him up to action. Come on. So Menelaus runs off and finds Antilochus, tells him the news. Antilochus turns and leaves the fighting to go warn Achilles. And Menelaus hurries back to the body of Patroclus to continue helping. And this is tragedy for Antilochus too. This is the first he's heard of the news, and he begins to weep as he runs off, leaving his own men exposed. And Menelaus runs back and stands with them around the body of Patroclus again. And he says, you know, I sent Antilochus to warn Achilles, but Achilles is not going to come rescue us. Even if he does choose to jump in the fight again, he has no armor anymore. His armor was taken. We've got to do this ourselves. And so Ajax is like, okay, the two Ajaxes here will hold the line and defend while Meriones and Menelaus haul the body off. And so Ajax picks up the body of Patroclus and lays him over the shoulders of Meriones and Menelaus. And Ajax hold back the other army. And Hector and his army are pressing intensely down, and Ajax try to hold them back while defending the body as they try to haul it off the field. And the book ends like this. So the two Aeantes kept on beating the Trojans off, but on they came, assaulting the rear, two in the lead. Aeneas the son of Anchises, flanking glorious Hector. Fleeing before them now like clouds of crows or starlings screaming murder, seeing a falcon dive in for the kill, the hawk that wings grim death at smaller birds. So pursued by Aeneas and Hector, Argive fighters raced, screaming death cries, lust for battle lost, and masses of fine armor littered from both sides of the trench as the Argives fled in terror. No halt in the fighting, not now. And so we end rather intensely. We're trying to get the body of Patroclus off the field, but we haven't even succeeded by the end of the book. Okay, let's look at the key features of this book. First of all is the idea of tension. Much like in book 15, where we're slowly drawing out the action to build to a key moment. In this particular book, we are slowly moving towards the moment when Achilles realizes Patroclus is dead. We know that's a key moment that's going to trigger some action, namely Achilles joining the fight. But rather than run the news to him quickly, we drag it out through a whole book. It develops the narrative tension. Next, there's also the theme of a respect for the dead and an honor for the dead. We've seen the battles over certain bodies, and also the stripping of the bodies for war gear throughout this book, but never quite so intensely and clearly as this moment. This is a step up from the battle over Sarpedon's body in the previous book. And we see this need for resolution and closure with the funerals of these valiant heroes. We also see the brutality of war in the disrespect for the dead. The desire of the Trojans to turn Patroclus into dog food, for instance. This is building towards something, particularly as we get towards the end of the book. And Hector's disrespect of Patroclus is going to be amplified as we go forward. When Achilles and Hector finally go head to head, there are going to be consequences. Next time we'll see what happens when Achilles finally does get the news about the death of Patroclus and how that changes everything. It's a pretty great book and not to be missed. Thanks for watching. You can click to subscribe or watch another video, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.